So picking up where we left off in the second video, Frederick the Great, the King of Prussia, great Enlightenment thinker. He expanded Enlightenment ideas, particularly that of French culture throughout the state of Prussia. But I suppose more important for us is his expansion of empire. Ultimately, Frederick will do two very important things. One, he will leave Prussia with the most competent and well-trained professional army in all of Europe. And second, he will leave Prussia a considerably larger and more powerful state, considered the fifth most powerful state in Europe during the 18th century. In the map you're seeing, you can see that Prussia, the Duchy of Prussia, was a relatively small area, very small actually. It was, again, just another state in the Holy Roman Empire. And his father, Frederick William, had created this incredible army, but he'd never really used it. And as we saw with the War of Austrian Succession, Frederick the Great, his son, used it to take Silesia from the Austrians. By the end of his reign, he will have added all these areas: East Pomerania, West Pomerania, Brandenburg, of course Silesia, West Prussia, South Prussia, and East Prussia, making Prussia a relatively large country in Europe, and certainly the major adversary of the Austrian or Habsburg Empire. And this leads us to the discussion then of the 7 Years' War and the sort of balance of power in Europe. That is, the balance of power of Europe, meaning the idea that no one country should be more powerful than the others, so that there is a balance of power, so that one doesn't take over the other countries. And Prussia is gaining ever more power. The 7 Years' War, as I said, was a global conflict, really the First World War, although we don't call it that. It lasted from 1756 until 1763. You may have heard of it before in an American history class, referred to as the French and Indian War. And the French and Indian War was basically just one campaign or theater of war in a global conflict. Why did this war become a global conflict? Well, because the two countries of Britain, or Great Britain, and France are on opposing sides, and both have empires by this time. Both have colonial expansions all over the world, including that of North America, of India, and in Asia, and of course in Europe. What happened with the 7 Years' War? What's the story? Well, the generalities of it are that, again, Prussia and Austria are struggling for dominance within the Holy Roman Empire. And after the War of Austrian Succession, 1740 to 1748, the major powers go through what's referred to as a diplomatic revolution, in which certain powers switch their alliances to other powers for various reasons. In this, Prussia establishes an alliance with Great Britain. Very important. Also, France establishes an alliance with their former enemy of Austria. Other smaller German states like Hanover will join with the Prussians and the British, and there will be other countries that join as well. But those are the major belligerents: Prussia, Britain, France, and Austria. And this diplomatic revolution is pretty extraordinary in terms of the balance of power of Europe, because it switches everything. And perhaps most importantly, it puts Britain and France in war with each other. And again, they both have empires. Frederick the Great, once again, is the first to make the move in 1756, invading Saxony and taking Saxony, but leads to this much larger war of the all over the world. For Frederick the Great and Prussia, they fight to hold Silesia, but they find themselves outnumbered. They now find themselves not only against a war with France and Austria, but now Russia joins the alliance against them. Great Britain, remember, is an island nation. It can only send a certain amount of troops into Europe. It also has to fight wars in here in America to stave off the French. It has to fight in India, just stave off the French as well, and their navy has to fight all over the world against the French, leaving Prussia largely to itself, defending itself from 3 countries. At one point, Frederick the Great in Prussia is basically surrounded from the south by Austria, from the west by the French, and from the east by the Russians. And it seems as if Prussia is not only going to lose this war, but they're going to literally be obliterated. There is the Battle of Kunersdorf in 1759, in which the Austrians and Russians defeated the Prussians. And it seemed again as if Frederick the Great was going to lose his entire country. Prussia lost in that battle some 19,000 soldiers, only having about 19,000 left. And they all basically headed to protect the capital of Prussia, that is Berlin. Austrian and Russian forces gave up then on their advance to Berlin because they feared that they would be stretched too thin on that march to Berlin. In other words, they felt they needed to take positions throughout the Prussian territory, mustn't just send all of their troops to Berlin, which is strategically a good idea. But in that time, Frederick was able to amass an army of Prussians to defend their country that numbered in the tens of thousands. Around 33,000 Prussians were ready to protect the city of Berlin. And therefore, the Battle of Kunersdorf, as it could have set about the destruction of Prussia, actually allowed Frederick to amass this great army for defense. By 1761, though, he was still surrounded, and there was nothing he could do but sit and wait and try to fight out a war if he was attacked. Then came about what Frederick the Great referred to as the miracle of the House of Brandenburg in 1762. This is that in Russia, the ruler of Russia, which was a Tsarina or Empress named Elizabeth, died. And as we previously discussed, Peter III took the throne. What's important about that is that Peter III was a great admirer of Frederick the Great and of Prussia and what they had done militarily, and he immediately called off the war that Russia had with Prussia, meaning now Prussia simply faced 2 armies instead of 3. Not only did he call off the war, but he allied himself now with Prussia and Great Britain. Frederick the Great again referred to this as a miracle of the House of Brandenburg. And the Treaty of St. Petersburg in 1762 ended all hostilities between Prussia and Russia, and as I said, actually created an alliance. Russia helped Prussia immediately, taking care of the army of Sweden, which, believe it or not, during the 18th century was a powerful military country, Sweden, and that war was known as the Pomeranian War, and that ended those hostilities with the so-called Treaty of Hamburg. This allowed Prussia then to focus entirely on the Austrians, because by this point now even the French had been called back to fight against the British, who were beating them here in North America, were beating them in India, were beating them on the high seas. Britain was destroying the French Empire. Prussia now had an alliance with Russia, and as it basically came to be, now had to defend itself only against Austria. The Prussians and Austrians fought between each other, but by 1763, a treaty was signed. The Treaty of Hubertusburg. 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 This ended the fighting between Prussia and Austria, and not only ended the fighting, but allowed Prussia to keep the rich territory of Silesia. And so, it, again, as I said, it remained a large territory. Ultimately, Prussia won against the Austrians, but Great Britain becomes the major winner of the 7 Years' War. It defeats the French everywhere. And this is the beginning, as 1763, of the British Empire. So 1763 is also the Treaty of Paris, which ends the war between the British and French. And of course, that's important in American history. But it's also important in Europe. And now that Great Britain is the major winner of the 7 Years' War, but Prussia also stands strong and with an alliance, an unusual alliance, as I said, between Great Britain, Prussia, and Russia, who now stand opposed to countries like France and the Austrian Empire. So it completely changes the map of Europe, if you will. I mean, in terms of alliances. So what Frederick leaves, as I said, is a great empire, or the beginning of a great empire. The major results of the 7 Years' War are as follows. 1, the British Empire was established throughout the world, from North America to India to Asia. It now was a world superpower. This is the British Empire, with the greatest navy in the world. 2, Prussia became now the dominant power in Central Europe over Austria. From this point on, Austria becomes more and more a diminishing power. Ultimately, will be diminished by Napoleon. And 3, the British-Prussian-Russian alliance changed the balance of power in Europe. That alliance creates such a powerful division in the balance of power of Europe that although things will change, as we will see, it allows Prussia to become an increasingly dominant, powerful state throughout the 18th century and throughout the 19th century. Ultimately, Prussia, as we'll see later, will become the state which unifies Germany in 1871 under Prussian dominance, under a Prussian king or Kaiser. And therefore, Prussia is a very important state in Europe and the diplomatic situation thereafter. This will only change when Napoleon Bonaparte invades and changes very much the entire map of Europe, which we will look at later.